I didn't want it to feel not Journey. I didn't want it to feel like, because a 91 piece orchestra and a 32 voice choir is an enormous amount of horsepower, and Journey is marked by its intimacy and its subtlety. And so I was constantly battling this urge to just let loose and really let them go for it, and realize, you know, I always think it's cheesy when people do these kind of remixes or whatever that really betray the whole point of the original. And so it was like, it became this interesting challenge for myself to go, I'll pick a few salient moments where I'll let the orchestra loose in a few key places, because there's no denying that's musically satisfying. But the otherwise goal, a 91 piece orchestra playing quietly and with restraint, is its own magic.
I'm going to jump straight in this one because there's not a lot of mystery about this one. This is the only one that we've ever done where it's like, I know what I'm getting into, but I don't know what I'm getting into. So the mystery is, while it's not inherent to the particular composer or his or her works.
Was composer in quotes there?
Yeah, I'm using it very loosely.
Yeah. Nice to know.
There's so much about this that even though I got to be present, I was honored enough to be present when you recorded this in the illustrious St. Luke's Cathedral in London town. There's so much about this that I don't know. I came to Journey late. I remember exactly where I was when I found out about Journey, and I was sitting.
St. Luke's. What is this?
And what do you do? I was sitting at the Game Awards, the VGAs at that time.
Yes, the Spike TV.
The Spike TV Video Game Awards. And it was winning Game of the Year. And I was like, what is this game? It just completely swept past, but I knew that it was a big moment in gaming because even though that game company was a first party studio, I believe at that time, correct?
They were never owned by
Sony.
But they had an exclusive 3-game deal with Sony. You know, Sony, it was 100% finance. They own the IP, all that kind of stuff. And
so that would today still be considered first party, but it's not like a Sony studio, like an Insomniac or Naughty Dog. But it wasn't,
Correct.
A true independent, but everyone said this is the first time for an indie game to win.
The way I always saw it was indie. It was like if you were working on, Uncharted, Journey felt like an indie. But if you were Mike Bithell or comparable, it felt like a AAA or a whatever AA or whatever. It felt.
Indie.
Journey for years was whichever camp you were in, Journey was in the other one.
Okay.
That was how it always seemed like, because it was
a game without a home. It
was less indie than the real indies, the Bithells, or like at the time, John Blow had done Braid, or John Mack had done a game called Everyday Shooter, and these were kind of like the big indie game. Or Chinese Room did not Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, Dear Esther. These were the indie games around that time that were making, and they were so-called proper indies. But yet, at the same time, despite being a Sony exclusive and developed on PlayStation, for PlayStation, and Flow having been a PS3 launch title, the other games that year that were, in contention for Game of the Year was like Telltale's Walking Dead Season 1, Mass Effect 3, rounding off the Mass Effect franchise, Assassin's Creed 3, Dishonored.
Some stiff competition.
It was a big, it was one of those in
and
hindsight.
Even within the indie space
year.
as well, too, right? Because Walking Dead as well. But for me, there were two conversations that I was aware of that were happening about the game. And this is a great segue, by the way. There's the conversation about the game as a game. And then while
Right.
people talked about how beautiful it was and how easy the systems came to the player and just the conceit of what the game was, there was this conversation that was happening about specifically the music. And I feel like it was the first time that I remember hearing a conversation about specifically the music, even though I'd been aware, obviously, as a musician, the music that was in games. This is the first time it was a stand. It was the first time I ever heard of a soundtrack being for a video game being nominated for a Grammy. So there's all of this weird conversation that was specifically focused on the music, and then shortly thereafter, you and I, became friends by exchanging cat videos or cat pictures on the weirdest way.
Yeah, and I think and it was because it was hot on the heels of all that. Then I think it was the following year at DICE and all the rest of it that The Last of Us was exploding, and so we were in a lot of the same rooms.
Yeah.
Where Journey, you kind of knew we didn't meet during the Journey part. It was kind of like that. If I said I worked on Journey, that is what made you aware of what that is. By the time The Last of Us and all that and Infinite were just, everywhere. It's a crazy sort of 12-month window. It's crazy to think it was also 10 years ago.
Yeah, that to me is actually the best segue. So here we are, and I remember walking down the street of London with you, and us just kind of offhandedly remarking about how much life can happen in 10 years, how much our lives have changed, how much this industry has changed, how much this world, not to be too glib or use hyperbole, but truly how much this world has changed in the last 10 years, even within the last 2 years. And I've seen more cause for us to look back at some things, especially within the last 2 years, because there's some simple things that we took for granted. There's some very basic, what we consider pedestrian, banal aspects of life that we just never really appreciated until all of a sudden we couldn't do them anymore. And I feel it. I don't feel like I was the only one, but I've seen it within you and a lot of people that kind of we run with, that became very introspective and also retrospective. And so it seemed like of course you're going to do this. It's not just, hey, this is what we do when something happens at 10 years, but there was a true conceit and a true motivation. And I remember the first time you told me, it's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to London and I want to record with the London Symphony Orchestra. And immediately I had two thoughts. One was, I want to be there. Like I immediately was just like, I just want to be there. And then two, with all the conversation of remasters and all the conversations of redux and redos and re-envisionings of, I was curious for you as the composer, why do you feel that it needed to be redone? And for the benefit of the audience, I feel like it's a conversation that not only can we have, but also we can have with the music, because I think the music does definitely speak for itself. But I wanted to hear from you in the purpose or for the purposes of this, within the confines of this forum. Why do this?
Yeah.
Why do this album?
It was there were sort of three threads that came together. The oldest of which, the fourth, I guess, the oldest of which was Journey itself. It's just the game never let off the gas. I mean, the fact that of all the things that I've worked on in the interim, and or including the things that came before Journey, but really everything after, it's still just like the brightest kind of star in the sky. It to the extent that if you think of the night sky and the constellations as kind of like your ancestors, this is still that North Star that seems to just kind of, everything seems to move relative to. And so I mean that in the best way, it's the I don't resent it at all as like, don't you know, I've been doing all this other, haven't you checked out Abzu? I don't feel that way at all about it. I'm grateful that there's something that seems to maintain relevance. I always assume things will just age out and stop mattering to people, and which is normal. But this one seemed to have a sustained interest. So there was always, I always get contacted at a fairly regular clip for orchestras saying, "Can we perform bits of it live?" Or students saying, "Can I use this music in my student film or on my YouTube channel?" Or so it's like that pot was always being stirred. So then maybe 4 years ago, something like that, I got cold called by the London Symphony saying, "If you ever want to work together, here's how to reach us." And I don't know what put me on their radar, but it was one of those emails I kind of almost didn't think was real, because this was, the London Symphony. There's nowhere really to go beyond them. They're every composer's bucket list collaborator, and so it was like, oh my God, what are you up to tomorrow? It's just how do I take advantage of this immediately? But then I also thought they're an illustrious and seasoned traditional orchestra, and as you well know, I actually don't write normal orchestral music very often.
No.
I tend to lean on more weird kind of one-off combos.
Here's a weird 16th century instrument that doesn't even exist anymore, and I'm going to build one.
Yeah, exactly. In combination with, exactly. Like, I'm a big fan, even when there are orchestral instruments, which there's usually some variation of, it's still some kind of, odd combo.
Perversion.
And they can handle that, but at the same time, when you're going to use an ensemble that's played together for, hundreds of years, it's like, let's lean into what they're best at. So I kind of sat on it and was like, that's a card I'll play someday. I didn't know what. And then flash forward another few years to 2 years ago, and Darren Korb and I are doing the 10th anniversary of Supergiant Games record, where we went to London. We were at Abbey Road with like a chamber orchestra, doing these orchestral reimaginings of the greatest hits of, Bastion, Transistor, Supergiant, and preemptively we were doing a little bit of Hades. And it was like one of the best experiences of my life. And I remember whenever I'm in London, I always kind of make my list of who do I want to visit while I'm here. And I remembered I reached out to the guy Mario at the LSO, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be at Abbey Road if you want to just come have a coffee and we can finally meet face to face after kind of several years of exchanging emails periodically." So he came, and we had a great time, and it kind of reignited this, what are we gonna do together? And there was something about my brain on the right hand side talking to LSO, and the left hand side I'm literally at Abbey Road talking about 10th anniversary with Darren. And we were doing Pathless at the same time. Of course, the pandemic hit immediately thereafter, and this was 2020. So, flash forward, then the final step was a year and a half later, 6 months or so ago from now, from today. It was like August or something around there that it kind of clicked. Oh shit, Journey's 10th anniversary is coming, and I can kind of suddenly all these pieces, all these threads combine into one. And I thought, what about a 10th anniversary revisiting of the material? And when we talked about it on Play Watch Listen, Mike said, was this partly motivated to kind of go back and fix something about the original? And other people have asked that same question. And it's definitely no. Not that I would consider the original perfect or unimpeachable or, some like divine work or whatever. There's plenty that I sort of wish in a sense I could change, although I respect that it's this time capsule of where I was in life, and it'll always be, it's like if you see a photo of yourself looking awkward from high school, it's not like, oh, I want to go back and retouch that and Photoshop my current face on it.
There's definitely some times when I've done that, but you're preemptively answering a question that I wanted to ask, and I'm glad that it's been something other people have asked, because it's not like, yeah, I did this soundtrack, I did this score that worked seamlessly within the game mechanics of the game. But then that is sealed and sacred. That is preserved, as you're saying, in the past. But it's not really that. It is the emergent works that have arisen from it subsequently. So like you did the score, that game shipped and everything, but you can't go back and change anything.
Yeah.
But you also, like you said, people have reached out and said, can we perform this? You have performed this. You've done this for Video Games Live. You've done this as a touring show. You've done this with the orchestra or the players from Chicago. You've done this in Australia. You've done this around the world, and you have you have to iterate upon what you originally did in order to put it into a different medium. So in a lot of ways, this isn't a remaster. It's not a redux. It's not. This is where the arrow of that music has been pointing to the entire time, and that's something that I understood when we were talking about this in London. It's not like, yeah, when I first did this, I only had the budget to be able to get some soft synths, and a couple of soloists, and I had we keep talking about this. I had a $200 mic. And now I've got the ability to go back and do this. You're gonna pull it out. There it is. Yep. Always hold on to gear. If you buy one, always hold on to it. Never get rid of it.
Yes, the Rode NT2.
And Rode NT2.
Yep.
But I mean, it's not like, well, now I've got the resources, whatever that means, to be able to do this. It feels like a true evolution. So I have an hour to commit to this enterprise, whereas I know we talk about this ad nauseum, like we always do. But for you, this is such a deeply personal work, and in a different way than Goldsmith is, or John Williams, or James Newton Howard, or anybody else as we've talked about in the past. So I hate it when people ask me my favorite. It's impossible. But I do, knowing how we discuss things, I thought it would be best. We can either take this in parts and we can revisit this, and I'm happy to walk down through the entire album. But for you, I it's not about the recording. It's not about the fidelity. It's not about anything other than, I would love to know from you, when you're standing there on the podium in London and you are baton in hand at the end of the piece, not downbeat of 1, but bar 539. The one when you just knew in the core of your being, that was the one. How many pieces like that? And if so, if those do exist, I would love to know how many there were, and I would love to focus on those, and I would love to hear from you what you were thinking in those moments.
Well, I'm curious because one of the things that's interesting about being a composer and conductor is that there's immediately two versions of that question, because it's am I hearing it as the composer going, compositionally, that represented everything I was hoping to get across musically in this abstract, like what's in the soul, as it were, now manifest out in a world, vibrations in the air for people to hear, versus the conductor, which is looking very much at, was that the best version the violins are going to give me? Is that did the cellos really sing there the way they ought to have? Because sometimes those can be at odds with each other, and I've felt that before, where the composer in me goes, oh, that had a rough quality to it that I know, if I'm being this puritanical conductor, would argue is not the best take. But I want it to feel like kind of a car coming up on two wheels as it rounded the bend too hard, that kind of thing. And so occasionally, there's always the argument that sometimes composers are actually not the best conductors for their own music, because they need to hand it off to somebody who can be more objective. So I'm curious. This
is sounding a little bit like the writer-director relationship, right?
Yeah, like the difference between one who does both versus the director who's taking someone else's script and saying, now let me see it for what it can be, beyond your, mental inner image that's fighting with the realities that we're facing.
For sure. And the writer can be like, I never considered it being presented in that way. Okay, that's interesting. Or you completely missed it. That's not what it is at all. Yeah. It's the writer-director that typically there's a little bit more of an authoritarian, borderline tyrannical position that is made manifest in that situation, versus you, when you're going to be surprised you can't mold and sculpt. I don't think, maybe this is my ignorance, but you can't mold and sculpt the performance. You can suggest, you can have notions, and you can have direction, but it's not like truly controlling it with the same level, I think, that a director does. Would you agree or disagree?
From the podium, you mean?
Sure. As a conductor.
Yeah. I mean, you have a lot. I mean, the notes on the page are the notes on the page, and it's a little bit more tedious, or considerably more tedious, to like change those notes relative to let's change the line or let's change the intent of this scene. Theoretically, you could do that, although it is not without its challenges to, rethink on the day. But
as a director, I can put an actor exactly where I want in the frame, light it in a certain way, and if I want to be an asshole about it, I can line read them and give me the exact, I can tell them where to look. With a musician, you just can't do that. There's just too many things that are inherent to the medium that are different.
Yeah, I definitely think the analogy can only go so far. It's actually an interesting question. I don't know. I'm always kind of in a bit of a warrior mode when I'm recording, and particularly on this one.
Yeah, I think one of the days you took a bathroom break, but beyond that, I saw you take a couple of sips of water, and you were a man on fire like the entire time. It's always like the Hangover, that gif of Zach Galifianakis with all the like formulas flying around. That's always kind of how it feels, where you're trying to think, okay, very musically, I want to make sure to really tee them up to have everything that they need to really just play and not feel like they're juggling and standing on one foot with all the different elements. And I want them to just be artists. But I'm also thinking, all right, we got 15 minutes till we're coming back from lunch. We had 20 bars left to really polish on this piece that we were working on before lunch. Then we can put it to bed. Then the next big chunk, I think if we spend an hour on it, we can really... And it's like I'm sitting there and there's so much logistics involved. It's not this... Hopefully to the outside world, like for someone in your or Andrea's from your chair, hopefully it looks like we're just having fun here. But there's definitely half my brain at every given moment that it's like a sniper trying to gauge the wind so I can aim into it, and always wanting to make sure that the math is just, right where it needs to be, because it is expensive to fall behind schedule. And sometimes it's not even possible. But I love that you, when you talked about like the budget in particular, I figured I would start by playing the very first thing that I wrote on the very first day. This is not a thing that's actually publicly out there because it's just a thing I've kept on my computer. Actually, it is out there in the form of our very, very first teaser trailer that came out in 2010, 12 years ago, where Genova had first told me about the game in early 2009, so 13 years ago. And Flower had just shipped, and he said, we want to start with music so that we can all kind of feel something, and then it can help shape the actual design of the game. We want to have an emotional, true north that serves as a guide. So could we start with some kind of theme? And obviously we stepped through the game, and the game didn't exist. Flower had been out for like a week. And so I said, let me ask some questions, and I walked to my car, and the theme kind of occurred to me. It was one of the only times that ever just was that lightning moment. And I left myself a voicemail going, start with cello, da ba da ba da ba da ba da, add harp and flute and blah, blah, blah. And remember I called Tina Guo, the cellist, and I called Amy Tatum, flute player, and I said, can you bring a bass flute over to the studio? And so we recorded much later, got referred to as Nascence. The cello and flute I recorded of Nascence that day was never changed again. But if you listen, the harp was done with MIDI and the strings were done with MIDI, just as a quick and dirty, this is the idea. I never thought this would stick, but I didn't want them to hear an expressive cello solo as MIDI. I was like, I got to record that preemptively. So just called in a favor. Tina, can you come by? It was easy to call in a favor with her. No one knew who she was in those days. So here was the Nascence as I delivered it that same day as my first official meeting on the project.
I also hand wrote this, and we tracked it without a click. So that's a fake harp. And then the cello comes back, and listen to all the strings in the back and how kind of obviously fake they are. So the funny thing is, every aspect of that, no note ever changed, even including the string arrangement, despite being fake. I just recorded it one for one years later. And I remember...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, but while that reverb trail is still almost fresh, please A-B and just play the same cue from London Symphony. I think it's worthy of... Because this is what we started with.
So that was where it began, and by the time the game shipped, the harp was live, the strings were live, and then when we go to London, re-recorded Tina in LA.
I remember sitting on the balcony next to Andrea and just overlooking. I've never been in the room with an orchestra before. I mean, we did Light in the Void, but not like this. And there's something about being in a church, regardless of your beliefs,
Yeah.
where there is just an inherent sense of awe and reverence. And to hear this rising up from the ground to us and looking at Andrea, and this is the first cue, and this is the first moment where like we're actually doing this, and then looking to you.
I extended it a little. We had to start with this.
I mean, I don't think I will ever be able to hear that song without feeling that way. And that's what's so...
It meant so much to have you there, man. It really...
Well, not only, yeah, man, and it was... You and I we've been through so much, and we've seen a lot of life in 10 years. But it was... I don't even know how to... There's no analog, and I always try to find it. It's like this. And I don't have one for it. It was just me taking in the room for a second, and... I just felt lucky. I felt lucky to not only be there, but I felt lucky to know you. And there's not a lot of opportunities that friends get to experience their friend doing something, a culminating moment, and being able to be like, I was there for that. and like seeing you hit a home run, you know, it's just, and you wrote that in your car. You know what I mean? It just came to you.
There are those moments, particularly at the start and the end. You know, we began with nascence and ended with apotheosis.
Fuck.
And I did that kind of on purpose because of that, where it you know, those were the pieces that bookended the project for me, where nascence was the one I wrote at the very beginning. I was 24 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, but just somehow this thing kind of more or less effortlessly came out. And then 3 years of really struggling, culminating in this, you know, really, we'll get there, but I struggled with the ending forever, and finally kind of seemingly got it, and then the world has just embraced it in a way that you can't pay for, you can't ask for. And I get these such personal messages. So now these pieces are kind of like old friends, where sometimes I have a slightly antagonistic relationship with old music of mine, where I hear it and I'm like, what a missed opportunity that was, or I could have been more bold, or I've that's so hackneyed. I could have been more original there, or I have a hard time, you know, even when someone tells me they love it, it's really hard to kind of detach from all the things that might have been better in some parallel reality, as the other Booker and Elizabeths ran to a different lighthouse. Like, they're going somewhere more compelling than where I'm going. But this one somehow, because it's been, you know, it's not that the amount of validation it's gotten is necessarily, you know, all that it is or anything like that. But I guess knowing that it seems to have taken on a very personal meaning for people, and I feel so grateful about that there's sort of, part of me feels like it would be in very bad taste and very disrespectful of their experience to feel like, to let this one be antagonized by me the way I normally am. So the result is that conducting it was like, hey, it's really nice to see you again. And boy, we've both grown. And there was something that really felt, I had my own version of what you're describing, which made it kind of out of body, because it was like, I didn't write this. The guy 10, well, in the case of Nason's, 13 years ago, wrote this. So yeah, I mean, look, couldn't have asked for, I feel like I'm wrapping up here with the way we're talking.
Dude, yeah, we're off to a fucking bang, aren't we?
I know, yeah, because I really wanted to, you know, one of the things that was, as you mentioned, about being in the orchestra, being in the room with the orchestra. Remember Andrea echoing the same sentiment, where the two of you and like Simon filming and, you know, one or two other bystanders who were not in the orchestra, you got to hear it, and I from the podium, of course, but really in a way yours was the best. You had the widest angle within the intimate space, and it'll never sound to anybody else the way you guys got to hear it, because the way everyone else heard it is all those mics like a spaghetti strainer, you know, feeding into a system that we then sculpt and mold, and we try to capture, and we try to make it feel, you know, in a way as much like it was in that room as possible. But it'll never really be the same as the air moving, because the people 20 feet away are making it do so with their instruments.
And not only that, but there's a sound that you don't hear. And I'm glad that it's not included, because it makes it even more precious and rare. But it is the sound of 90 musicians moving into position.
Yeah.
And just them rising in their seats and getting that one last movement out before they must be absolutely still and focused. And
the collective inhale of 90 people.
And just all of us holding our breath, waiting for that first. And I know you'll remember his name. I can't. Who? Because like you said, we picked up Tina at the amazing Studio A in Capitol in Los Angeles, but you intentionally wanted people to hear what was being played over them.
Oh yeah.
And do you remember the cellist's name? The soloist. You have to look. Probably there was almost 100 people.
I should know. I can't remember. I can tell you in 1 second.
He set the tone perfectly, and that was a brilliant move of yours to be able to say, I want you guys to hear, because you can look on the page and you can see what the notes are, but I want you to hear what's happening on top. And because when we recorded it, that beautiful cello is not there.
Yeah,
it's something that we're like, someone else has got this honor. And so everybody was at that point the backup band for Tina's beautiful solo.
Yeah. Same problem with Nascence, starting with Nascence, of counting with that. She's all alone at the beginning.
Right.
So like everybody, we're going to start this whole project together with a piece that you just have to kind of imagine and just come in.
And there's also, there's no choir that's there. The only soloist that we had there, of course, was the flute. Mm-hmm. And my favorite still is the oboist, man. That girl, she was so charming and lovely. And wickedly talented, but my favorite thing, and this is what I've never been able to see from an orchestra, because every time if I've ever seen an orchestra before, which now there's only been like 4 times, I've seen like a proper orchestra, and thanks to you, has been more coming. Hell yeah, dude. Hopefully not 5-hour-long Bach pieces that I have to bail on you guys.
Yeah, that was one for the ages.
Time.
Yeah.
Holy shit! Looking over at Andrea and being like, "I gotta go, dude." And he looks at me like, "What? We're here for you.
God will strike you down right now."
Apparently, I was like, "I have to go." I know how the story ends, but the fact that she has this wicked solo. You should probably cue one of these up too. She has this wicked oboe solo, right? And she plays it to perfection on the dry run, and then puts her oboe down and picks up a book. And just goes back. I was like, that is someone who, and it had nothing to do with her connection to the material, because she stayed connected to the material between bar 87 and bar 104, because that's all she needed to do. Yep. And for the rest of it is, I need to let go and trust. And I learned something from her. She'll never know this unless she watches or listens. But I learned that there's a skill about playing an instrument, or about performing some level of craft, whether it be writing, acting, directing, musician, whatever. And then there's a higher skill that lives above that allows that particular person to sit back and watch without judgment, the other people around them, their level of skill, without judgment. And that's what she was able to do. And then drop right in. Like a bar 83, pick it up, 104, 105, she's out reading a book. Just turning pages, just living her life.
It never fails to amaze me, their ability to compartmentalize the brain like that. Because when they play, they're, consummate artists. And their ability to kind of push pause and let their mind kind of rest, and to gauge really well. Nobody blew it. Nobody underestimated. Oh, he's going to need me in 10 minutes, and then it turned out it was 5 minutes, and they were caught unaware. It was never that never happened. Me? Yeah.
The fact that I love because you would always do just a full run through with everybody, and then you would kind of like zero in, the reticle would get tighter and you'd be a little bit more granular. It was like, okay, we're just going to focus on the flutes for this part. Everybody else can kind of sit back. But watching that first run through, how many people, without you giving them a note, would pick up a pencil and make a note for themselves going, I need to remember that this is actually going to be easier for me to play. Or the musicians that would sit up and go, just to let you know, is it important that we do this? Because if you want that, I can't play that this way. Or maybe we could position that to an F sharp because, and I was watching, I felt like I know enough about music to understand what you're talking about, but you guys are speaking at such a high level of well beyond my comprehension that I felt like I was in Hangover, A Beautiful Mind, all this like figures are floating in space. I was like, holy crap! Which actually I think that was gaffed from Da Vinci Code, wasn't it? That's what he was actually
probably.
All right, well, get us off of that
well,
bad
so
Tom
one of
Hanks
the-
hairdo, and let's
yeah.
move into another piece.
One of the things that people think that Journey is orchestral because there's strings and they're in apotheosis, and I was born for this, but it's really not. And so I wanted to highlight some of those areas to show just how truly not it is, and then to A/B so you can see how it was modified. So like
please.
This is from the very, very, very opening of the game. It has this cold open of the character in a graveyard. We see a sort of meteor. The character rises into frame. Camera rotates to show the mountain, and we see a brief little transparent overlay of the controller to show to the player, like, this is how you move the camera, this is how you move. It's there for a moment. As soon as you touch it and start walking, it's gone. That's the only UI in the whole game. And so I recorded, I remember there was a percussionist I borrowed. He was recording with John Debney on the Predators movie, like the one with Adrian Brody that was like 10 years ago. That was they were recording a bunch of percussion for that score upstairs I was in the studio with Debney, and I asked the guy. In fact, I'll never forget. He had just come from Sony doing Tintin with John Williams playing marimba. I'm playing vibraphone. And this was the guy that was also the vibe soloist on Catch Me If You Can. So it was like sitting there just geeking out, talking to him, and then I was like, you mind if I just kind of swipe some, because it was this huge collection of instruments that had been delivered to the studio in this giant car-sized crate. And I was like, you mind if I just kind of swipe some stuff and do some recording? He was like, oh, have at it. So I was recording all these weird kind of like things that would drone, and like you shake them and they make little odd, and built this sort of just drone. It's just literally one long B natural. And of course, then a bunch of synthesizers.
Nothing about this is a synth.
No, there's also layers of synths, but they're not soft synths. What it is I would take samples and I would just mangle them so far that they become something else. They start off as like, here's a cello VST, and I just push it through so many layers of stuff that it doesn't really sound like anything other than a synth anymore. So you get this just pure texture. I recorded myself doing like, and just to create pure texture. And it's like this for the first 20 minutes of the game. So then here's, how do you turn that, into something interesting? Lean on the choir a lot.
Are those voices and cellos? Celli,
Yep.
sorry.
And then the full strings and Tina. It was an interesting challenge, because long held notes in an orchestra I tend to find very boring. So it was like, let's have movement. There's a nice thing they can do here where they're playing these harmonics. So it's all the same. It's just basically fundamentally still just a long drone, but it's just a tiny bit more to it,
Those three percussionists that were just like trading off between each other, moving at such
percussion choreography is always a thing. It's always an interesting challenge. To make sure that they can get from one instrument to the other in time. So that gives you a sense. So the next one, I really was excited. This next one was one of the hardest to do in the whole thing, because this is like the first. So the game starts off very drony, and then the player reaches this third major area, which is the moment from like the poster image where it's truly open desert. And the mountain is in full view. The sky is green. Matt Nava, as art director, really wanted the blue sky of the finale to be a real payoff. So let's start green. And so he, created this iconic environment. And the music is super interactive in its design. So here's the original, and I just wanted to step you through the component parts. So this is the cue that triggers in the game. This actual raw stems I pulled in for this of when you do your little chirp sing and the little kite kind of dolphin thing flies out and starts to play with you. And so if you're alone, if you're not connected to another player, it plays like this. So the flute, it's like a little dance. A little variation on the theme. So you can hear Tina playing pizzicato.
Yeah, the marimbas.
It's marimba and some like vibe samples that I put weird reverbs and distortion on. So when it loops, if you hang around in that area long enough, it'll loop, but in an effort to not be very obviously boring and repetitive, it mutes the flute. And now you can really hear just how kind of not orchestral it is. And if you chill and you abandon the little friend, the percussion will go away. And if you literally set the controller down and just let the system hang, eventually it will get rid of everything except this underlying synth drones. And so, but all this is made different if you're connected online to another player. The system goes, there's another player there. Let's add the multiplayer stems. The first of which is harp, played by Charissa Barger, and then the melody is viola, to serve as like, it's like you, but it's different from you. Where cello Tina is you, Rodney, the viola, is always the other player. As this is true through the whole game. Every single cue has harp and viola stems that are only accessible if you connect online to another player. And the idea being that it's supposed to get fuller and more engaged and energetic. And also you can hear the viola. In fact, let me isolate the viola and the flute. So you can hear the counterplay, the idea that they're talking to each other.
Who came up with that idea though? Was that driven by design?
No, this was all my pitch of like, I want the game to feel fundamentally different when you're alone. I want the interactions in the world to drive your experience, but there also needs to be two versions of that is whether you're alone or connected to another player.
Okay.
So here's the tune. It's counter melody, it's not doubling. So if you hear the full mix of every element combined, which is how I did it for the soundtrack album, I just made a composite, like just cut to the chase, all percussions, ambiences, melody, multiplayer, you get this. So the thing that was interesting about this project then, with the LSO, is most people at this point have internalized the sort of the album edits that I made. And so I thought that, I don't necessarily, in some cases I went back to the original cues, but in some cases I actually used what I had done with those cues to form the soundtrack album as my, I decided to make that the initial leaping off point. So here was, I thought, that's literally how the track starts. Track 5, Threshold, on the original album, starts cold open right with this, which is not actually how that level starts in the game. There's cues before that, but they're very ambient and droney again. And I was like, we've heard enough of that to this point. Let's just cut to the moment of excitement. So I cut all that music for the album that technically comes before this in that level. So, but it didn't feel like a good intro for the LSO project. So I thought, okay, that flute, da-dum, ba-dum, bum, that sort of waltzing figure, this dance, I want to spool up the engine a little bit. So let's let the flutes dance around before we introduce, and then bassoon and cello, and let's just make this more orchestral. It's actually symphonic now. And then here. And that little moment with the strings is actually, like, it really is such a waltz. All this original, like, but it doesn't really feel like a waltz unless you really kind of realize, oh, it's So that's why I couldn't resist in this context just letting the strings do this to just own it. There's no equivalent to that in the original. If you listen to the strings behind the English horn, that kind of, just, those are what I mean where I say, it's not that I've reorchestrated it, it's that I just thought, let's make something new. Let's just, embrace that.
So how do you fight that temptation within yourself? There's a difference between, like, I'm going to always find a way to somehow draw upon, like, all right, we're redoing this beloved movie, right? So there's some things we obviously know that we have to carry over, but we'll do something that's different. But how do you, as the composer, what's that battle that you're waging within yourself between saying what's at the spiritual core of this song? What is the quintessence of this piece?
It wasn't easy.
That to me is like, well, I have to keep that in, or this has to play out this way, because otherwise it's not that piece, because I wrote that piece. This is score, right? This isn't soundtrack. This isn't something that you are just abstractly creating for the purpose of itself. It is serving the purpose of a mechanic. It is serving the purpose of a narrative moment. It is serving the purpose of, so absent of that, how it's essentially not the same piece at all. It's something completely new.
And the other thing is
out of the old.
Absolutely. And the other aspect was that I didn't want it to feel not Journey. I didn't want it to feel like, because a 91-piece orchestra and a 32-voice choir is an enormous amount of horsepower, and Journey is marked by its intimacy and its subtlety. And so I was constantly battling this urge to just let loose and really let them go for it, and realize, I always think it's cheesy when people do these kind of remixes or whatever that really betray the whole point of the original. And so it became this interesting challenge for myself to go, I'll pick a few salient moments, and the next one I have is actually one of those. So this is a perfect tee up that you've done here, where I'll let the orchestra loose in a few key places, because there's no denying that's musically satisfying. But the otherwise goal, and I have another one for after this that's an even better example of this aspect of a 91-piece orchestra playing quietly and with restraint is its own magic. There's something really, because it's also,
it's like it takes a giant doing ballet.
Yeah, and it takes so much temptation it takes so much discipline to hold it back. And I did a lot of revision. A lot of my first drafts of this, Traveler Symphony drafts were, okay, here's the too far past the point of good taste version. Now let's cut down and out and slice and get rid of it and delete whole chunks of it and say, okay, what do I really truly need? But in a second I'll get to a good example of that. But here's one of those rare moments where I did really decide I got to let it loose, because this is one of those areas where I was operating within the constraints of the original, and trying to make it sound as big as I possibly could, knowing that, fortunately I didn't have to get that big to sound huge, considering how small most of Journey is. It's kind of like if you look at somebody in a chair not moving, just breathing and staring at you, and then they finally go it's like this seismic event.
Right.
Because Journey moves like that for so much time, I just added a little bit of the string orchestra. There's only about 20 minutes at most of the actual string orchestra in all of Journey, and it's kind of like visual effects shots in Jurassic Park. I save it for very key moments so that like the CG dinosaurs, in Jurassic Park, it's like 6 minutes of the whole movie, because they use them very carefully. Partly because the technology was so unproven at the time. In this case, it was a function of budget. I knew I wouldn't have much time with the strings. It was a debate on if we'd be able to afford anything other than the soloists anyway. So here's from the original, the surfing level where you're gliding down the sand. The signature like money shot of the game, Matt Nava and his brilliance, where the camera whips around and locks at this 90-degree angle, and we have what they refer to as the parallax tunnel, gorgeous sunset, and then I said, this is one of those moments where it's a reminder that the mountain is fundamentally the goal. In case you've forgotten, we're going to point you right at the mountain, and it's going to be beautiful and sad, and I'll let the strings speak, and then you'll hear the player then immediately starts careening downhill again, and we let all this and but you'll hear it's still mostly synth pads. There's big boomy percussion to a degree, and then the cello and viola in particular doing really really working their ass off. So here's cutting into the tunnel in the original. It's just violins in the orchestra. It's not the full string orchestra. It's only violins. And a little harp, and here's the surfing finale. You can hear Tina's doing all the heavy lifting here. And the viola now in counter. And then the player kind of goes sailing off a cliff, although people have pointed out to me over the years, and I've gotten a few comments already with the LSO version, that when the player goes soaring off, it's actually a different cue in the game that accompanies the player at the tail end of that. It's far more dramatic and suspenseful. But I felt like it was such a kind of gimmick to be like, and then just ring out for the album when I was doing it 10 years ago. So I kind of borrowed cues from other places to build that ending, and that Tina more lyrical solo, how we end it, just felt like a more elegant coming in for a landing. But I kind of went back to the original for this new version, and I've seen multiple comments from people going, oh, I'm so happy to hear it kind of properly for once. So now listen to how that section of the parallax tunnel is like, now's a chance to really let the choir come forward. And then when the surfing part starts again, rather than it being this interplay between cello and viola, and you can hear there's a lot of synth pad through this, you know, hear all that, you can hear there's a lot of just kind of textural stuff in the background. I largely got rid of anything equivalent to that and just said, this needs to be a moment for the brass to absolutely just go for it. So it's like, you
Hell
know,
yeah, dude.
just let them have fun, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they all right, we have time for one more, or we can do what we always do. We just pick this up and do another one. But
all right, so, I mean, I'll end with one. Well, let me do this. I'll be extra quick in the spirit of the to play, because I do want to end with some of the difference with I Was Born for This, but I will just
that's that and Apotheosis were the two that I really wanted to.
Yeah, the real quick, what I was going to say about the orchestra playing as intimately as possible. In Atonement, the section of the game where the player's rising up through this kind of tunnel, vertical, almost like a silo, that was one where in the original, I completely rearranged everything about how it plays, because I thought it really culminates in this big lush string moment briefly in the original. And then I have this whole thing where I wanted it to sound really nice and big and full during this kind of, again, a kind of a waltz section. And I was hating it during my arrangement process for the new album. And so I thought, what if I just let it get real small? So yeah, here's from the original. So you got Tina and the strings together, and you hear those big drums. Boom, boom, boom. And this is coming out of a fairly big moment. This here. And so when doing the new one, it just never, ever felt right. And so I flipped them and I said, the big moment needs to come after. And every time I tried to do that bit where you hear Tina doing, it was just like, I didn't like it no matter what I did. And so then I thought, you know what? I'm overusing the orchestra. I'm overusing my tools. Let's get this moment as small as I can. And so it's all the strings put on mutes. It was difficult to orchestrate because I needed them pretty full prior to this. And then I have to very quietly hide where individual sections of the strings, violas, cellos, basses, violin 1 and 2, where they stop playing so they can sneak on their mutes and, deaden the string. And then the choir comes in with just this, very small ethereal, like, ooh, so that it gets almost nothing as that waltzing section, and then culminates in the orchestra letting go of that material that had originally come first. So here's that.
Play it.
Take it all the way down. And then, of course, the big, This just had to come after, not before. And then just to end, I'll highlight this one moment of I Was Born for This that for me was the emotional apex of this whole project, because the thing with Journey has been, not only did it launch my whole career, it facilitated meeting you, it facilitated, meeting Angela, it facilitated meeting Andrea, it facilitated every dollar I've put on the table, or that I've, that's been put on the table, that I've bought food with and paid rent with, and just everything about my life seems to have sprung from having worked on it. And but one of the things that to me is, so at least as important as all those things, is it's brought so many performers into my life and musicians who I've collaborated with over the years, whether it catalyzed a new project that sent me off hunting for somebody and then I found someone interesting, or in many cases, like Kristen Nagus, she'd made a cover of Journey on English horn and oboe that she put on YouTube, and I tracked her down and said, I'm working on a new game called Abzu, and I want you to be the feature soloist. And she's done everything with me since, including, as you bore witness, flying out to London and sitting in with the LSO through the whole process. And so I was born for this to be a bunch of these treasured performers all together playing on this piece, and not just, it's really not me anymore trying to say, here's this music I wrote and I hope you like it. It's like, I need these performers to be what it's all about. And so if you listen to this moment in the original where we play the theme and it builds, this is about halfway through. And there's this break, and it becomes very lilting here. And we get this Japanese haiku. And then the theme one more time. So, in the interest of time, for the LSO version, first off, every section of it is sung by a different singer, in trying to leverage it being their original language. Lisbeth Scott sang the original, doing her best with Japanese in that case. Kono Michi ya Yuko Hito Nashi Aki no Kure, by a famous haikuist named Basho. Along this road goes no one this autumn eve. And I have this singer, first off, as soon as we have that little break with this da-di-da-di-dun, da-di-da-di-dun, over the years of performing this live, I've always evolved away from the original, and I always told the orchestra, let's march this, dum da dum da da, like we're steadfastly marching home. So I orchestrated it into this new version as like, I don't want to dance so much as gallop, and but before we unleash it, everything drops down and we're left. It's just Tina, and Taylor Davis on violin is a YouTuber who did the most amazing Journey cover of all time, a music video shooting in the snow and in the sand. And when I found her video, I brought her in. We worked on the Banner Saga and a lot of other things together since. And so I was like, I want this to build on the theme. The LSO disappears completely, and it's just Tina and Taylor duetting. And then we unleash everything, and the Japanese comes in. And then when the theme comes in, it's like a dozen singers that I've worked with over the years, Laura and Travia, all the other soloists from this piece, these other YouTubers who I admire. And it's just like, this to me is a moment of these people. It is my gratitude that this thing has brought these people into my life. So here's that moment. So we start with Taylor and Tina, and funny enough, Tina's actually doesn't play in the original I Was Born for this, so it was nice to make sure she was part of it. And then, now with the LSO. And into the Japanese. everybody. And keeps going from there.
Dude.
Yeah, I've never had an experience like it, man. I've never.
What incredible. I've never looked at it that way. To go from I don't want to dance as much as I want to gallop. And you're right, man. It was an experience. I don't want to be done with this. I want to keep going because there's still too many moments that we haven't touched on that I want to do. But
sure.
For now, par for the course for us, and in true spirit to what we normally do. This feels like a wonderful bookmark for us to keep, for us to return back to. But it speaks to, you're a great writer, you're a great composer, and I'm by no means diminish that, but I feel like there's something that happens when any true great artist allows something to move through them and then become and belong to someone else. And that is what has truly made the greatest works of art something truly great, is that it no longer belongs to the artist, and this no longer belongs to you. It's something that you have been a custodian of for now 10 years, but it now belongs to Taylor Davis, it now belongs to Tina Guo, it now belongs to the LSO, it now belongs to the other people who have played this in schools, who have played this for funerals, who play this for weddings. It now belongs to everybody else. I'm not being glib and overselling it. It's truly something that exists outside of the thing that you originally sketched in your small, tiny studio apartment in Burbank. And I'm just glad to be part of those people galloping on towards the finale. Man, I'm too fucking emotional to go to this dinner right now. It's not good. I'm gonna go to dinner and they're like, have you been crying? I was like, don't worry about it.